Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
Well, can I agree with him that desecration is awful and I think should be condemned across the House? We are, as I said before, Mr. Speaker, committed to tackling all forms of hatred and division, including, of course, Islamophobia in all of its forms. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I was astonished that the vacillating Prime Minister did not take the opportunity to rule out definitively blasphemy laws in this country. They have no place in modern British society. This is the land of Monty Python and the life of Brian, after all. Will the Minister take the opportunity to do what the Prime Minister would not and rule out completely any opportunity to introduce blasphemy laws?
Yes. The exchange in Parliament exposes Sir Keir Starmer's inability to take a decisive stance on the issue of blasphemy laws, leaving him vulnerable to sharp criticism. His vague and cautious response to Tahir Ali's question about prohibiting the desecration of religious texts and prophets reflects a pattern of evasiveness rather than leadership. Starmer's reluctance to categorically reject the idea of blasphemy laws, as highlighted by John Cooper's pointed remarks, underscores his fear of alienating either side of the debate. This indecision betrays a lack of conviction and portrays him as a politician more concerned with optics than with defending the principles of a modern free society. John Cooper's biting critique of Starmer's vacillating approach cuts to the heart of the issue, in his failure to firmly rule out laws that would undermine the values of freedom of speech and expression. Starmer demonstrates a lack of courage and vision. Cooper's reference to Britain as the land of Monty Python and the life of Brian serves as a stark reminder of the nation's proud tradition of challenging orthodoxy and embracing satire, values that blasphemy laws would threaten. By sidestepping a clear rejection, Starmer inadvertently gives the impression of pandering to those who would stifle these freedoms. Seema Malhotra's straightforward and unequivocal yes in response to Cooper's challenge highlights Starmer's glaring weakness. Her directness contrasts sharply with Starmer's vague platitudes, further emphasizing his hesitancy to take a firm position. In trying to appease everyone, Starmer ends up satisfying no one, exposing himself as a leader who lacks the decisiveness required to navigate complex and controversial issues.
Dame Priti Patel, 3 minutes.
Well, who would have thought that one of the first acts of this awful, cruel, ideological Labour government would be to assault the nation's pensioners and remove winter fuel payments? And I think, let's be quite candid, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now seeing the nation's pensioners fall victim to what is an ideological decision, Labour's betrayal, while they literally succumb to their union paymasters through the gross amounts of public spending that they are shoveling in the pockets of many of their paymasters. It's quite interesting. I've got a time limit, you've just spoken. It is quite interesting that there's been so little transparency around the finances and the fiscal choices that this government has chosen to make. No impact assessment, for example. No honesty around the cost of all of this to the exchequer in the long run. Nothing around the administration of the household support fund. And so I would actually like to ask the front bench, the Labour ministers, about how they have literally made this spurious claim that they had no choice in this decision, when, bear in mind, a member of their government claimed a couple of weeks ago that they'd been run on the pound without this decision, which is just extraordinary and speaks of the fiscal ineptitude of this government. So desperate are they to justify this brutal cut.
Dame Priti Patel's scathing critique of the Labour government highlights her condemnation of their decision to remove winter fuel payments, framing it as a direct attack on pensioners and a betrayal of the nation's most vulnerable citizen. Patel's rhetoric paints the Labour government as both ideologically driven and fiscally irresponsible, accusing them of prioritizing their union paymasters over the welfare of pensioners. She argues that this decision reflects not necessity, but ideological bias, with the government funneling large amounts of public funds into areas that benefit their political allies, rather than addressing pressing social needs. Patel's criticism also focuses on the lack of transparency and accountability surrounding Labour's fiscal policies. She highlights the absence of an impact assessment and calls out the government for failing to provide clear information on the long-term costs of their decisions. This, she suggests, exemplifies a broader pattern of dishonesty and ineptitude in Labour's handling of public finances. Patel further ridicules Labour's justification for the cut, referencing a claim from a government member that the decision was necessary to avoid economic instability, describing it as both extraordinary and a sign of fiscal incompetence.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This whole net zero session this morning has proved once again to me how out of touch this place is with the rest of the country. The poorest 40% of UK households will be made much worse off with net zero policies. This is according to a report from York University. The poor in Ashfield will get poorer, and rich eco-fanatics like Dale Vince will get richer and pass on some of his millions to that lot there and just stop oil. Does the Minister, can the Minister confirm to me, to the nearest £1 trillion, how much net zero will cost?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Let me be clear, I'm very proud of what this government has done to protect the poorest in society from rising bills, which, by the way, were as a result of international factors and a volatile gas market. But let me be absolutely clear. The only way that Dale Vince, his climate extremists and his enablers will come anywhere close to having influence on energy policy is by electing a Labour government, which, frankly, is the only thing voting reform is going to achieve.
Lee Anderson's remarks during the net zero session highlight his sharp criticism of current environmental policies, arguing that they disproportionately harm the poorest in society while enriching wealthy eco-activists like Dale Vince. By citing a report from York University, Anderson underscores his claim that net zero policies will widen the gap between the rich and poor, framing the agenda as elitist and disconnected from the struggles of ordinary households. His pointed question about the cost of net zero policies, delivered with a touch of sarcasm, emphasizes his skepticism about their feasibility and fairness. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts or opinions, feel free to share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more updates, and join us on Telegram for exclusive content and discussions. Your support means a lot.